So I'm going to go through this rather quickly. My coffee's gone, and it's time to just roll through this passage. This is a passage about economy, and that's a parable that Jesus tells. And we're going to talk through, maybe thinking through why Jesus might have told this parable and what his intention might have been. And was Jesus a capitalist? Was Jesus a socialist? Was Jesus a communist? How would Jesus think about economic strategies and economic planning and the way the world functions? And we're not going to answer the question. We're not going to answer many questions today. We're going to read a passage and we're going to ask a lot of questions. And as we ask these questions, hopefully it'll help us to not it'll help us to stop thinking that we have all the answers to this conversation. It's worth thinking about and talking about. So let's go to the passage today. I'm going to read it first in the Message, and then we'll talk about it in New American Standard. Here it is in the Message. It's also like a man going off on an extended trip. He called his servants together and delegated some responsibilities. To one he gave $5,000, to another $2,000, to a third $1,000, depending on their abilities. Then he left. Right off, the first servant went to work and doubled his master's investment. The second did the same, but the man with the single $1,000 dug a hole and carefully buried his master's money. After a long absence, the master of the three servants came back to settle up with them, and the one given $5,000 showed him how he had doubled his investment. The master commended him. Good work, you did your job well. From now on, be my partner. I almost read that condemned at one point. The master condemned him, and I thought, no, the master commended him. It's totally different. But I wonder how often it is in the religious and Christian realms that we almost have a tendency to condemn people who do a good thing, a job with investment, who maybe double their investment or make some money or make a profit. But the master here commended him. And Jesus is telling this story. Is Jesus equating the Father to the master? Is he equating himself to the master? I don't think it's fair for us to automatically make those assumptions, but it has to be a question we ask. The servant with the $2,000 showed how he also had doubled his master's investment. His master commended him. Good work, you did your job well. From now on, be my partner. The servant given $1,000 said, Master, I know you have high standards and hate careless ways, that you demand the best and make no allowances for error. I was afraid that I might disappoint you, so I found a good hiding place and secured your money. Here it is, safe and sound, down to the last cent. The master was furious. That's a terrible way to live. It's criminal to live cautiously like that. If you knew I was after the best, why did you do less than the best? The least you could have done would have been to invest the sum with the bankers, where at least it would have gotten a little interest. Take the $1,000 and give it to the one who risked the most. And get rid of this play it safe, who won't go out on a limb. Throw him out into utter darkness. Well, we're going to have to talk about utter darkness and the fire and that kind of parable where Jesus alludes to and talks about this utter darkness outside the gates kind of place. But that's not today's video. Today's video is about Matthew 25, basically the idea of these three servants. The first thing I would ask that pops into my mind as I read this passage is why does Jesus here, let's look at it right here. He calls his own slaves and entrusted his possessions to them. Why does Jesus, what do we do about the idea that Jesus tells a story about slavery and doesn't apologize for slavery and doesn't condemn slavery? Second, should we equate the slave owner to God? That's a question for us to ponder. Is God the one who gives us $5,000 or $1,000 or $2,000? He kind of starts us off in this socioeconomic situation. Does God give everyone different situations, talents, and socioeconomic entry points into life? I mean, of course, that's the way it happens. Some of us are born to families with a little bit, and some of us are born to families with a lot, and some of us are born with families with nothing, and some of us are born into families with a lot compared to the rest of the world, but just kind of average here in America. It's interesting, all the different situations and talents and socioeconomic entry points we can be born into. Some of us can be born with the ability to speak, and others can be born with a real struggle and fear when it comes to speaking. Some of us can be born with real quick math skills, and others of us can be born with slower ability to pick up on what 2 plus 2 is. It seems that in the parable, Jesus reveals that it's often easier to make 5 than it is to make 5 when you start with 5 than it is to start with 5 and make 5 starting with 2. Does it make sense? He doesn't say this, but it seems the obvious thing. If you've got 5, sometimes it's easier to earn 5 with that 5, working off of that amount. And sometimes it's easier to take 2 and to earn 2, or to take 1 and to double it. It's easier to double than it is to triple your money. But what is fair? And do we get caught up too often in thinking about fair? In this kind of conversation, this 5 and 2 talents and 1 talent, it has been a very, very much a subject of conversation with our current president, with Donald Trump coming to power, and people talking about how he's a rich man and how awesome he did and how he's done so well for himself. And then other people will argue, wait a minute, he started with $1 million loan from his dad, and he got another $1 million loan from his dad, and he started with a lot, and so it's not that big of a deal that he started with a lot. This is an interesting conversation. I don't think we can discount the fact that the 5 talent guy who earned 5 more talents started with 5 talents. He took what he had and he made the best of it. This passage, the master commends the guy with 5 who makes 5, and commends the guy with 2 who makes 2, or the gal with 2 who makes 2. Seems to me that time is relevant, but Jesus considered this time period to be lengthy, meaning long enough, at least. That's a poorly phrased sentence, but here's what I'm trying to say. Time is, relevant. I mean, it kind of matters who's saying it and what you mean. Like I say, how long is it going to take you to fix my car? And he says, a long time. Well, I want to know, do you mean a long time like it could take 8 hours, or do you mean it could take like 8 weeks? That's a huge difference, but both of them could be considered a long time. But what we know from this story is we don't know how long this long time is, but what we do know is that it was long enough. If it's Jesus called it a long time, then it was long enough for you to do something with what you had. See, I have gained. Good and well done, good and faithful slave. I'll put you in charge of many things. So what happens with this 5 parable guy is he gains, he's told that that's good, and it leads to more responsibility. What does this phrase mean? Enter into the joy of your master. What do you think it means that he says, good job that you've gained. You've been a good and faithful slave. I'm going to put you in charge of many things. Now, enter into the joy of your master. What do you think that means? I'll tell you what I think it means. I think it means that, Eugene Peterson in the Message translation we just read, he kind of, let's flip back there really quick. In the Message, he says, look here, here's what he says. From now on, you will be my partner. He kind of, in Eugene Peterson's translation, he says, now you're going to raise to this level, no longer master slave. You're going to be my partner. Enter into the joy of your master. Here's what I think it means. I think it means kind of what Eugene Peterson is saying, but he's saying that now you have taken and you have doubled or you have gained, which says to me, now you understand what it's like to be a person with enough to leave 5 and 10 and 1 with somebody else. Now you understand what it means to manage money. Now you understand what it means to share with others and allow them to manage your dollars. I wonder if in Jesus's parable here, these slaves were less slaves and more like the relationship a person has with a mentee or an apprentice or somebody that you're training and helping. Maybe we should read this less like slaves and more like learner or student or apprentice. there's still plenty of places where slavery is not condemned like it should be in Scripture. So I'm not trying to sugarcoat this. There's still that issue that we need to discuss at some other time. But there's something that happens here when the servant becomes the master, or the student becomes the master, or the apprentice learns to act like the teacher. He's entering into the joy of kind of mastering this money thing. Could it mean that the slave is becoming more like the master and will be experiencing a joy similar to the master's joy because he is learning to operate like the master? I think that's what he's saying. What is the difference in reward and response to the 2-talent and the 5-talent slave? Did you notice the difference? To the 2-talent slave and to the 5-talent slave, which one did he say? Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. What was the difference? There wasn't one. To the 2-talent slave and the 5-talent slave who doubled both of them were given this good and well done and good and faithful slave kind of response. They were both given the idea that they're going to get more. Now, let's get to the 1-talent guy. The 1-talent guy, the master comes back, and the 1-talent guy goes, Master, I knew you to be a jackass. Pretty much, that's what he's saying. I knew you to be a jerk. I knew you'd be a hard man, reaping where you didn't sow. You kind of take advantage of people. They do the work, and then you're reaping, and you're gathering where you scattered no seed. Is this slave, this servant, this apprentice, does he get it? Is he right at all? No, he's not right at all. No, he's missing the point. He's accusatory. Is it true or false accusation? It's kind of a false accusation, because although he gave you one, he gave you one. Although he gave someone else 5, he gave you one. We need to. It's a horrible response. He starts out on the wrong foot. He starts out accusing somebody else. He starts out not taking responsibility for himself. Was he justified or unjustified being afraid? Well, in this next passage where he gets called a wicked, lazy slave, you knew that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have put, here in this response and this tossed into utter darkness area, yeah, his fear seems to be justified. There's an old Hebrew version of this story that predates Jesus telling it. It appears there's the same story basically told with 5 and the 2 and the 1, but the 5 person, the person who's given 5 talents, he wastes it with harlot and flute girls. I don't know what flute girls are, but that's what I read. The 2-person talent is what the person given 2 talents is the one that kind of invested and earned, and then the 1-talent person does the whole burying thing. It makes me think this parable, this older version of the story makes me think sometimes we have to think through and make wise decisions. For example, I know that when I got a car as a teenager, I had to save up my own money and pay for the car, and I saved up however many dollars to pay for my car. And my parents gave me that same amount. So what I saved, they gave me. Some people, they were just bought a car. Their parents just totally bought them a car. And then some people, their parents never helped them. They never gave them anything, and they were just stuck to do it on their own. I've chosen to kind of do the same thing with my kids. They save this much, and I match it, and they buy a car. This story, this older Hebrew version, reminds me of that. Sometimes when you give somebody too much, they just waste it. They never see the value of $1. They never see the value of whatever, and they just are wasteful with it. And then you give them some, and they understand the meaning, and they start to understand that it's theirs, and that they can do wise things with it, and they can double it, and they can invest it. And then you give somebody too much, and they're afraid to do anything, and they don't have, too little, and they don't have the ability to function. I'm trying to think through here, how do we handle socioeconomic situations in America today? What should we do? What's wisdom? What would be the right thing to do? I would say, first of all, Jesus didn't condemn capitalism here. This is a capitalistic parable. This is a parable about somebody that's making money through investments. And I would say that there's some capitalism involved, and Jesus certainly doesn't condemn it. But he didn't call for Robin Hood-like economic policy either. Sometimes people say, well, Jesus was a socialist. He wanted you to help the poor. But you might want to realize, you might want to think through the fact that Jesus never said, take from here to give here. He said, give. And so people who are passionately opposed to socialistic policy would say it's not Christian to steal from the rich to give to the poor. And so you've got this idea that capitalism isn't condemned, but neither is socialism mandated. So what else? What's another option? Some of you argue that Jesus was a socialist. I can't agree. This parable seems to celebrate generous capitalism. Generous capitalism. We talk in America about how we're trying to be a capitalistic society and we were built on capitalism, but I would say we're not really very capitalistic. We're a weird breed of some kind of nationalism that I can't really describe, but it's certainly not generous capitalism. Jesus didn't seem to be practicing capitalist either. He seemed to always stay poor. He possessed very little. So you can't say that Jesus modeled for us capitalism. You can't really say that either. Jesus had much more valuable offerings to those around him. He had things to offer that were more valuable than money. When greedy capitalism is rolling like a freight train over people, we got to look beyond this parable. We can't just stop with this parable and say, well, Jesus didn't condemn capitalism. No, he didn't condemn capitalism. But this capitalism that Jesus doesn't condemn is a capitalism where somebody has enough to share. And then as those people who he shares with are rising to the next level, he treats them as if they're partners. He lets them enter into the master's joy in some way or another. So while Jesus didn't condemn capitalism entirely per se here, he certainly didn't promote a greedy, nasty capitalism like I would argue we've kind of gotten involved in here in America. And so you say, Josh, what if I believe in capitalism and I'm opposed to socialism? What do? Well, we're going to have to figure out a way to fight the nasty, greedy capitalism where CEOs are making multiple hundreds of times what the employee is making in such a way that it's a horrible, horrible, greedy capitalism that puts such a vast divide between the CEO and the employee that the employee can never enter into the master's joy. There's something wrong with that. So Jesus didn't condemn capitalism, but we're not talking about just capitalism in America today. We're talking about some kind of nasty, greedy form of capitalism that somebody has to stand up to. Maybe one of the coming videos I need to talk about standing up to the nastiness of greedy capitalism. But what I wanted to say in this parable, as we read this parable, first of all, is I wanted to ask some questions and I wanted to point out that Jesus didn't condemn capitalism entirely.